the night we met. It was a difficult birth. And when the doctor pulled you out, she pulled you low instead of lifting you up. No, here's the baby. There were nurses and doctors working on you. And for 45 minutes, you wouldn't cry. I didn't know what was happening, but I was sure you were dying. And I turned my head away so that I could not see you. And once I decided not to scream, I felt myself turning off. And when they eventually put you on my chest, warm, heavy, tightly bundled, I looked down at you. And that rush of oxytocin, that opening of the floodgate of love, that sublime, incredible thrust of bonding did not come. Good morning, everyone. As Maxine mentioned, my name is Natalie Bruvels, and thank you to Maxine and Marwan, and to Creative Mornings and Collective 44 for giving me an opportunity to be here this morning. And a huge thank you to Amanda. That was incredibly moving, and I can't wait to see your next dance. And thank you to everyone who is piping in. I'm so happy that we could be here together this morning. I'm coming to you today from Ottawa, which is on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. It is, in fact, Indigenous History Month. And today we're talking about matriarchy. And matriarchy exists as a governance structure in many Indigenous communities, one that cements a formal system of checks and balances in the governing of greater communities and nations. And in these systems, women have incredible power, politically, culturally, and ceremonially. But when we see ongoing events, recently the MP for Nunavut announcing she will not be seeking re-election because she's not welcome in the House of Commons. When we see ongoing racialized violence, gender-based violence, domestic violence against women on the rise, mothers leaving the workforce in droves because the requirements of the workplace and domestic life are incompatible, these are not disparate elements. And it is abundantly clear that we do not, in fact, no matter how we may on occasion valorize certain women, we do not live in a matriarchy. For foundational to a matriarchy is an ethic of care. We are in a time of forgetting, a time that feminist author Julie Stevens calls the post-maternal. And it's a time of cultural forgetting that reveals anxieties about caregiving and nurturing. So today we're talking about matriarchy, and I thought, how do I even begin to engage with this term? This matrilineal transfer of knowledge, of care, of customs, of recipes that I have often felt lacking and have always longed for, whether I realized it or not. My trajectory as an artist and a mother are inextricably linked, and I don't want to have to undo that connection. It's not necessary. So I'm here to present more of a series of dispatches from one white cisgendered mother during this time, the post-maternal. So I'm a painter, I'm a mother, I'm also a sister and an auntie and a daughter, but today I come to you mostly as a painter and a mother, a single mother to a 10-year-old boy named Thompson. You may have seen some of my paintings around Ottawa at Studio 66, or at Magpie in the Rideau Center, or the Art Gallery in City Hall. And to make an important clarification, it does not mean that you have to give birth clearly to be a mother. And also the effectiveness of the engagement in preservative care is not based on gender. But for me, this introduction to my child and my own motherhood was an explosive and transformational event. And from there, I started to heal and grow and struggle as both an artist and a mother. I began the talk with a monologue about the night my son was born. And that lack of bonding when they put him on my chest and I couldn't feel anything was enduring. And it's a type of estrangement that persists and we don't talk enough about it. But when Thompson was a baby, I would push him in strollers for hours on end. And it was a type of multitasking that allowed me to simultaneously care for him, but also indulge in my fantasy of walking away from this new life as a mother. And during that time, I would take pictures of him and I started making paintings like the ones we see here. This was actually at La Petite Mall Gallery, which was a wonderful gallery space that we used to have in Ottawa. And at the time of their showing, I wrote a sarcastic artist statement saying something to the effect of, I don't understand why everyone cares so much about babies. And it was a seemingly unusual position for someone who had a 6-month-old. What I did not realize at the time was that I was in the throes of a deep and dark postpartum depression. And that by taking those photographs and spending time to render them in paint in these colorful and gestural ways, I was studying my baby's facial expressions. And it was a desperate yearning to understand my child, to bond with him, and to feel comfortable and confident in my newfound identity and responsibilities as a mother. Here's a shot of Thompson looking at paintings I made of him. He's in his crib, which is also in La Petite Mall. Flash forward. He keeps coming to art openings with me. He's growing. And flash forward again. I've decided to go to grad school, something I never thought I would do, especially not while being a single parent to a growing child. But I wanted to pursue the MFA, a Master of Fine Arts program at the University of Ottawa to grow my painting practice. I wanted to engage in visual culture. I wanted to engage with representations of motherhood, and especially single motherhood, which is steeped in stereotypes. So I started in the fall of 2019 at this program. So in art history, we're pretty familiar with the Madonna and Child. But more recently, we can see representations of this same archetype around the city. And I relate to these posters, these Salvation Army posters, meant to elicit pity, meant to elicit charity from their viewers. I relate to them. They depict my family composition. And the posters reiterate the archetype of Madonna and Child, steeped in an ideology of sacrifice, an ideology of suffering, and having patriarchal roots of oppression. And so to engage with this, I knew I was going to have to delve into my own experiences as a source of knowledge. And Thompson almost immediately started coming to the studio with me, especially on the weekends. And this is a little sculpture that we made. We would blow bubble gum and then stick it to this wire frame. And I really had anticipated making a lot more quirky projects like this, and maybe even making this giant bubblegum sculpture. And I liked that it felt like it was focusing on issues of time, labor, play, care. But very quickly, Thompson wanted to paint. And this is an example of one of his paintings. And evidently the materials and substances of painting were occupying him in a way that they occupy me. And I also knew we had a much better chance of, spending greater amounts of time together in the studio if he had a lot of freedom, a lot of free reign. So he's making those types of paintings. I'm making paintings that look like this. And we're kind of starting to get into the swing of things in the studio. And then the world stopped. This is Thompson leaving the studio space during the first lockdown last time. And we no longer had access to the studios. Thompson and I started painting, or stopped painting. We stopped painting. And instead, we started doing a whole lot of this. And this is most likely instantly recognizable to many parents who have a relatively young child or children. And it's an online video gaming platform called Roblox. It was already popular, but it exploded in popularity during the pandemic. And in it, we have an outright reversal of roles. This is my avatar. This is Thompson's avatar. Thompson helps me around the he shows me around the landscape. He helps me. He's constantly giving me things without me having to give him anything in return. And one day as we were playing, I made this rather straightforward yet personally profound observation of, oh, there we are. And it sort of solved this problem for me as a single mom, how to take a candid shot of us both together. And I was very charmed by that idea. And I began to use these screenshots as the basis for some paintings that I think of as family portraits, and also a reimagining of this Madonna and child archetype. So at the end of the summer, 2020, long summer, I was invited by the city of Ottawa to make this public art project for this big project called Microcosm, where an artist from each ward was to activate a passive space or to respond in some way to the pandemic. And originally I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to make a mural because I've been wanting to do that forever. But then when I realized I was not going to be able to secure childcare for the project's work period, the direction shifted. Because I thought if I were to decline this opportunity, here's some more photos. If I were to decline this opportunity, I'd be facilitating in the act of forgetting that I'm railing against, a way of excluding a mother's voice. And instead of declining the opportunity, I thought Thompson and I could try to do something together. And so we did this painting collaboration. And we made homemade paint and we squeezed it along various sites of the Greenboro pedestrian path or bike path. And what I was really wanting to do with this project, it was the beginning of thinking, of conceiving Thompson's mark making as, yes, his own creative expressions, but in addition to that, indices of the care I provide, like an index of the care I provide. And because we were paid for the project, I was paid and then he was paid, I thought this was an acute way in the moment to commodify exploited labor. And that was especially and often inconceivably onerous to women and mothers during the pandemic. And this idea of wages for housework is really nothing new. And Silvia Federici wrote about it in the 1970s. And I think we're going to give you a link for that paper if you're interested. I'm going to go back for a second because I have to show you this too. It's an unbelievably excellent, unanticipated gesture of erased labor. Because one day as we were painting, I think we painted for about 3 days, little did we know there was a city worker on our trail pressure washing all of the paintings that we were making. And I mean, he retreated apologetically once the situation was explained to him. Thompson wasn't thrilled about it. But I thought this is a perfect visual of erased labor and also the hazards in junctures of bureaucratic communication. But I knew this was tricky territory for a mother to engage in artwork about motherhood and mother work. The situation is nothing new. I find a lot of solace and inspiration in artists and writers who came before. Mary Kelly, or more recently, books published by Demeter Press, which focuses exclusively on academic writing about motherhood, and writing by Andrea O'Reilly, who actually founded the press. She wrote a book called Matracentric Feminism, which is a feminism that includes mothers, and also more locally, Collective 44.4. And we can see the poster campaign of 44.4 here. And it's a growing collective of mother artists in Ottawa. And I was thrilled to find artist mothers who are actively taking on this issue of visibility and trying to create visibility through poster campaigns, but also generally supporting each other through crits, through sharing information, encouraging and challenging one another to make challenging work. And there's an awareness in the group that there are mothers who came before us, and there's also a strong desire to create space for those artists who will be mothers and to help them navigate any potential slowdown and possible resistance to their work. So all of these writers, these artists, this collective are working to undo this prolific forgetting associated with care. In the fall of 2020, finally gaining access to our studio space after about 6 months away because of the restrictions was joyous. It impressed upon me what I already knew, how impactful the studio space is for both thinking and working through projects, but we were extremely fortunate to have a space like this. And it reminds me of what Virginia Woolf says, for a woman to write, she needs money and a room of her own. I didn't have the childcare that money could ostensibly buy, but I definitely had the room, a big room at that. I also don't mean for that to sound glib or any type of example of toxic positivity, because a major draw for me of a painting practice is the solitude and the intermingling of an intense focus and simultaneous abandon. And to be able to accept that lack of alone time in my studio when Thompson was present, no matter how much I love him, was going to require a drastic reframing of what I was in the MFA program to experience. So we both took a deep dive into this situation together, and we started making paintings again. We can see my paintings here, and his painting here. We'll see more of his paintings as well. And I was still using screenshots from the Roblox video game, and even more so now, because I had received judgment about my parenting skills. Probably my most favorite or memorable was from a pretty famous Canadian artist during a studio visit. And he said that I was going to have to be prepared to answer why I would let my son play so many video games and why I would let him play the trashy ones or the non-educational ones like Roblox. And I thought, first, I'm not going to answer your question. And second, I'm just going to make the paintings much bigger this time. And so that's kind of what we have going on here. I'm still using the Roblox screenshots, but I'm also starting to incorporate layers of stenciling and other materials to have these collisions of worlds occur. We can see Thompson's paintings over here. His are all clumped together as mine are all clumped together. We'll see mine again in a second. And he was very free-spirited making the work, painting, whatever he felt like, whatever came to mind. So in the room, we've got his clump of paintings over here, sort of like his figure, and my clump of paintings over there, my figure. And then these two individuals in the room having this conversation via painting. And so what we also see happening here, in addition to Thompson's paintings being indices of the care that I provide, is showing a relational identity. As I am changing him, he is changing me. It's this constant dynamic. and it points to the impact we have on each other. And I think showing our work together explores this relational identity in ways that showing my paintings alone simply could not. And there's another corner shot. And we also covered this space in this plastic sheeting. They're tablecloths, plastic tablecloths. And we built kind of like a DIY video game landscape. We've also been videoing a lot about what's going on in the studio space. And I had wanted to show you a little clip of one of the videos, but we can't really do it on this platform. So I'm going to try and post it on my Instagram account. And if I'm able to do that, that's where you will see it. Our next installation project we made was called Ring Around the Rosie in Violet Light. And we continued making more paintings. And this time we assembled them into multiple figure-like formations all around the room, who are all joined in this pandemic game, Ring Around the Rosie. And the thought for this, the thinking about this was conjuring up ideas about proximity, about play. What does the idea of closeness feel like and play feel like at this particular moment? We really extended the usage of these plastic tablecloths. And Thompson loved the visual impact of the color, and I did too. But I was also really interested in the tablecloths for the impact that they might have on how they might operate for viewers or people moving through the space. Because it's such an unusual surface upon which to walk, and there are decisions that have to be made. Shoes on or off, for instance. Is the surface safe or is it too slippery? If it's safe, okay then, but perhaps let's try not to disturb it too much. And since we're talking about the forgetting of care, I'm very interested in the impact that those bodily responses of care could have on the act of viewing. What does it feel like to look at art when one is embodying care, when one is being careful? Does it affect the duration of looking? Does it affect the experience, the analysis, the appraisal? You can't see it too much here, but I'll show it to you in the next slide. We also had some Bristol boards on the ceiling, and they were tucked into the scaffolding of the drop ceiling. My concern with working with Thompson was always, am I romanticizing this situation? Am I idealizing this situation somehow? And so I thought I really needed text to pull in the opposite direction. And so the way I had envisioned this ceiling was as something the glass ceiling might say if it could talk, words that the glass ceiling might say if it could talk. And so we have things like Whore, Madonna, and Available. Up here we have Welfare, A Mother's Pension, which I also made a painting about. Here we have Rough Around Edges. And these are a few more shots of our installation. Thompson was making these little figurines as well. And all good things must come to an end. And so this area of the building is currently under construction, so we had to tear everything down. It was a big job. I let Thompson skip a day of school to help. I don't know why he took his shirt off, but he took his shirt off. So for me, there's really a formal intervention that was happening in this work because we're not really used to seeing that type of engagement with mother and child or single mother and child. Probably the most familiar type of engagement that we would see in the media would be the 1 in a million chance a child in a single mother household becomes famous and is being interviewed on late night television and talks about their childhood and brings up the fact that they were raised by a single mother. And it functions as a fairly effective beeline to a certain amount of struggle and simultaneous elevation of the mother. And it allows for the opportunity to thank the mother, but the mother is nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be heard generally. And all of that labor, those experiences are removed from the general imagination. And it's that form, those parameters that I'm wanting to shift with this project. Because I'm clearly vocal in this, and Thompson is very much an active collaborator. So that was a breezy overview of the last 10 years of my life, and especially focusing on my time pursuing graduate studies, which is still ongoing. Of my time, Thompson's time together in the studio. And we create these vibrant, immersive spaces in an attempt to counteract this active forgetting associated with the post-maternal. Explorations of motherhood and mother work in art have often been experienced by artist mothers themselves as endeavors in taboo, or at the very least, less critically significant. And it's a source of frustration and fascination for me in terms of what it says about a society that does not value the care we have all relied on, whether performed well or not, and the care that many of us provide as a wellspring of artistic research creation. The 44.4 poster campaign is meant to address these silences and exclusions. And we see this in practical ways of exclusion for artists, art openings being scheduled at 7 p.m. on a weeknight when it's bath time and bedtime, or artist residencies that don't have childcare. The results are lost connections, lost relevance, out of sight, out of mind. But mother art is political, could easily be changed to mother medicine is political, or mother law is political. So the task, as I leave you this morning, your mission, if you choose to accept it, my mission, my task, is to really observe how care is being actively forgotten, how caregivers are being actively forgotten, and what we might be able to do about that. Because imagine a world where care is of primary importance. Thank you.
I was sort of wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about why you think it's so hard for mothers that are artists to be taken seriously.
Like we could just say patriarchy and leave it at that, but this is something that I'm like constantly trying to understand, like get at all of those little fine details. And one of the things that I noticed when I was just reading about motherhood studies, or just thinking about how we talk about motherhood, how we talk about childhood in general, was just some almost like linguistic conventions. So when we talk about, like if we compare childhood and motherhood, for instance, childhood easily becomes an object of analysis. Like you can say my childhood, it's mine, it's whoever it belongs to, it's, you know, yours to think about, yours to criticize, yours to, you know, be grateful for. But the same type of possessive quality doesn't really exist so easily for my motherhood. You can't really say my motherhood in a way that feels like natural. So that's kind of like a convention, and I wonder if that sort of feeds in terms to feeds into the not really being able to talk about it. But if we kind of flip it, if we turn it into like an active verb, you can say mothering, and there's an understanding that there's something being done, there's cause and effect happening, but we don't really hear about childing in terms of the child's ability to impact drastically the family dynamic. Because childing actually, I think, is like an old English word that still has to do with being pregnant and giving birth. So those are just like I'm still on my journey of trying to understand this, because it's not, it's something that's existed forever. But those were two little things that I kind of noticed, and especially in my work with Thompson, it's those two parameters that we're trying to flip. I'm trying to talk about my motherhood, and he's also very much an active agent in this dynamic.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that you mentioned Thompson as your collaborator, and obviously that applies to, your art practice, but then also, like you're saying, childing, mothering, you're sort of collaborating in the family dynamic that you have too. I love that. That's super cool. So I have a few questions popping in the chat here. Kelly's asking, what does a world where care takes precedent look like? I was terrible reading skills for me. I apologize.
Okay.
Where does a world where care takes precedent look like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a deep one. But you're, a master's student, so I'm sure you're.
I mean, I would love to get a lot of people's take on this, but we're healthier, we're happier, we're able to get enough sleep, we're able to get love, we're able to receive love, we're able to be empathetic towards one another.
Yeah, we're all dynamics are supported, I guess, right? So that we can all have the fullness of that we desire from our lives, I suppose. Okay, another one here. Oh, what can we do? These are heavy.
We're gonna solve all the problems this morning.
Natalie, please. Yeah. What can we do about internalized misogyny? Mothers are not even seen as people. That's such a hard truth. They are either put on a pedestal or judged harshly for every single choice, and also so often blamed for everything that goes wrong in one's life that it's become a cliche. Mm-hmm. How can we see mothers as human beings?
You're going to make me cry. That's so true. This is another gigantic question that it's more of a question of how can I function within that system, and how can I kind of maintain my own sanity. And so when I came into the program, I was reading a lot about anger, a lot about women's anger, and how it's so justified. It doesn't, as one of my colleagues said, it doesn't get enough airtime, which I loved that idea. And that was, so I really thought I was going to like paint these really angry paintings. And the anger is tremendously justified. But when it's something that's so personal, something that you live with on a daily basis, to be angry constantly, and I've definitely felt that, is exhausting. And so, like for instance, when that artist, that prof had said, like was judging my parenting skills for letting my kid play Roblox, my like immediate response was almost like petulance or mischievous, like, oh, I'm going to show you, I'm just going to make those paintings bigger. And that's, I don't know what that's called. Is that called petulance or whatever that situation is? It's something that I cherish. It's something that I value, because I find it, for me, it has more mobility than anger, and it doesn't weigh me down as much. So that's, one way that I try to get through it. And, the question of like, I think it was more broad, like how to change things, how to, make structural impact. I think, I mean, that's,
Wow.
that's huge, but, giving, and this morning I was really grateful for the opportunity, because I was able to speak from my own experience as a single mother. And so much of the reading that I had been doing about single motherhood, about art and single motherhood, was never actually from the point of a single mother themselves. Sometimes it was about a child who was raised by a single mother, or sometimes it was more like by a sociologist who was studying, you know, the lives associated with them. So I think speaking in first person helps.
Yeah, and I think too, like, I love that. I would say it's sort of on folks who are perhaps not parents, you know, to educate themselves, to reach out to their friends and family who are parents, and to be more active participants in those lives as well. Pearlie says that she's sure so many mothers are feeling seen right now, and she sure is. So thank you.
Wow.
You're getting a lot of like really beautiful comments.
Thank you so much.
I love, there's a great question here. So Frances says that she's found that mothers who are makers are often not taken seriously and are seen as making their hobby a side hustle instead of artists who are trying to grow their work. You find this too?
Oh, completely. And this just made me realize, I'll type it in the chat in a second. There's this writer, Olivia Heel, who's in the UK, and she's just written an essay. And I personally think it has the potential to be a paradigm shifting piece of work. And it's called Toward a Matracentric Poetics. And it's a way, it's like a framework for looking at work made by mothers. And one of the elements that I love about it is that if you're the reviewer or the critic, so to speak, is that you review it from first person. And so it sort of gives you a certain amount of credibility, or removes your credibility when you can't relate to those experiences at all, and yet you somehow feel justified to, you know, maybe tear it apart or look down on it. So, okay, let me just, before I forget.
And also, Shamima, she says, Natalie, thank you. You are so brilliant in your answers, and these are huge questions. I found your presentation so thoughtful, so thought-provoking, pardon me. You have a wonderful question here from Marianne. Has this exploration changed your use of color and shapes in your practice?
My use of color and shapes. I've always loved color. I've always loved color. And for me, it's like a visual song. And when I'm putting a painting together, the closest type of like analogy I could make is that, like, you know how a singer produces different voices? Like you have the head voice, you have the chest voice, you have your stomach voice. Well, I almost associate different like colors with those voices. So for me, pastel-y type colors is like a head voice. Rainbow colors are like more of a chest voice. And then you get these like muddier browns. That's more like a stomach voice. And so I need all of them in a painting generally. And for me, black is a very like piercing element in a painting. And I thought, so what's a piercing voice? And to me, that's like Mariah Carey's whistle register. So I've always loved color. I don't know, maybe that has something to do with, I started painting right around the same time I became a mom. So maybe that influenced it somehow. I'm really loving making things with the plastic sheeting, just because I'm still assembling it. It still feels very much like a painting to me. Like you can layer it, you can rip it, and you get sort of a different type of coloration. But Roblox, I never painted Roblox before doing this stuff with Thompson. So that's changed.
I love that. Somebody says here, you're making structural impact right here, right now with your talk. There you go.
Wow. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for being here. It
Yeah.
means a lot to me.
Well, I think the sentiment is very much so echoed in these comments here. Let's see, somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Okay, here's another one. There's just so much love. I don't even know where to go. How can mothers regain their identity after becoming a mother? I find mothers suddenly are no longer themselves and even lose their name and become so. And so is mom. Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, as someone who's not a parent, that scares the shit out of me. Pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lot of my personal hesitation with even starting a family is that idea of lost identity. I don't know if that's selfish, but
No, that's huge, and it doesn't have to be that way.
yeah.
And the book by Andrea O'Reilly, Matracentric Feminism, really helped me with that, because parenting has shifted and all of these pressures seem to be, placed on women almost with greater intensity. And the writer, Andrea O'Reilly, told this story. She has a couple of children. And one of them was like when her first daughter was younger, she took her daughter to this like dance class and just dropped her daughter off and said, bye, love you, that sort of thing. And then a couple years later, she has another daughter, brings her to the same type of dance class. And the instructor was like, well, aren't you going to stay? It's like mommy and daughter dance time. And, for her, and I completely, it's like, can you just give the mother a break? Like, can she just go out for a coffee? I'm sure she loves her kid and I'm sure dancing is great, but there's like this impetus to be like constantly engaged and to produce this like miraculous child. And I'm rambling, but I completely relate to your question. I often don't really know the answer myself, but there's so many brilliant writers writing about this subject that has kind of saved my sanity more than anything. There's also, if you're interested in it, another incredible book, Maternal Thinking by Sarah Ruddick, which is helpful, which has been helpful for me as well. I'll put that in the chat. There we go.
So we still have some great questions, but I'm gonna just maybe conclude on last two, perhaps. Somebody asked a really valid and wonderful question here, just in the sense of, do you have advice for ways that those that are not in motherhood can help mothers through these needed changes? I guess, what do you need from us?
Yeah. Well, childcare is a big deal. Childcare is a really big deal. And even just getting, my kid out of the house this morning, there was like that anxiety because I was afraid he wasn't going to want to go and he didn't really want to go. And so there's sort of that like, okay, is everything going to work? And they talk about that as being like a second shift. Like you go home, or even before you get to work, you've already put in a shift of getting this little individual, kind of sorted out for the day. But from my perspective, like going through this master's program, even if I look at a syllabus, there's no indication that parenting is going to factor into any of this in terms of bringing your kid to class if you need to, which is really not ideal. And I see this all over Instagram and it really bugs me how you get this like nice shot of the prof holding the mom's baby. And I'm like, hey, that looks really nice, but the mom needs alone time. She needs her baby out of the room. So childcare is like foundational infrastructure. just this idea that you can do both things at the same time is not sustainable.
Yeah, that's mic drop. Okay, so I'm just gonna sort of end on this beautiful message from Christine that says, Natalie, I can't express enough how grateful I am for fellow mothers who speak honestly and openly. It helps deal with the judgment. It helps deal with the judgment. It helps me feel sane in this insane system we function in. So thank you for doing just that this morning. Speak honestly and openly. That's beautiful, Christine. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I feel like I need to shake all that off. Thank you for this fruitful talk. I think we could probably go on forever, and I'm really enjoying this conversation, but work and so on. So thank you again for being here and for being an active member of our creative community here in Ottawa. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you, and hopefully we'll get to see each other in human form soon. So thanks for being with us, Natalie. Appreciate it.
That would be lovely. It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you again to Maxine and Marwan. And thank you to everybody for joining us this morning.